is Iannielli, and I'm a male to female transgender girl. Please excuse me with my voice. I happen to have a cold, and my voice is a little hoarse, but I still want to do my videos. Not sure what I want to talk about, but I felt inspired to do another video. One thing that's very important when you're ready to transition is that you make plans properly and you formulate a list. You can even do research on the internet to help you with that. They have great websites that serve as roadmaps for transition. If you're a male to female transgender woman and your desire is to transition, there are many things you need to do. The first thing is, how do you come out to your family, friends, employer? These are complicated issues, and you need to plan ahead. Of course, you don't know what the implications will be, and it's a very agonizing time because you know in your heart you want to transition, but you're caught in a quandary, because if you transition, you risk a lot. You could lose your wife or spouse, you could lose your children, you can lose your job, you could lose your home. So there's many things to factor in if and when you decide to transition. It's very complicated, and it's not an easy decision to make. I know from personal experience that I struggled with my decision to transition, and I held off for many years. I wanted to transition earlier in my life. I remember the first time I wanted to transition, I was about 19 years old in my first year of college, but I wasn't financially able to, and I was still living at home with my mom and dad, so that wasn't going to happen. Then I remember wanting to transition in my mid-20s when I was working. The problem was that I was living at home still with my mom and dad, and I still didn't have the financial resources, so it didn't work then either. Then when I was in my early 30s, around 33, I wanted to transition, but I was still living at home, but just with my dad. My mom had passed away when I was 29, so she passed away at 4 years earlier, and that was very hard for me to deal with. And I had to go back. I had to start going for therapy, which was my very first experience going for therapy. And I needed to talk about my depression, missing my mom, my shyness, and my transgender struggles. I went there for quite a while, but it was expensive, and she didn't take insurance, so I had to kind of budget out my money, but I needed to continue with my therapy. The interesting part of going to her was that she actually set me up on a date with my wife. I was mixed up. I wanted to transition. I was in my early 30s, but I never dated. So she suggested that I give dating a try before committing to transitioning. She thought it would be very hard for me personally to transition and deal with all the emotional aspects that come with transitioning and the possible rejection. So I gave it a shot, and I met my soon-to-be wife. We went out on a blind date, and we had a great time. We went to see a movie with Mr. Bean, and we went to Applebee's, and I treated her with respect. I opened the car door for her. When I first saw her, I fell in love. She was wearing this cute beret, and she had a beautiful coat. It was winter time, and we had a nice time. We had a nice outing with the movie, with dinner. Then we walked around the mall a little bit and headed home. And when I dropped her off, I asked her if we could date again, and she said yeah. Then I gave her a kiss on the lips, and we said goodbye. And I was very happy because she was really my first date, and it felt good. So I thought we hit it off pretty well, and I was calling her, and we established a relationship. I was living at home with my dad. I felt a little bit embarrassed about that, but I didn't have the monies to find my own place, and living in Long Island happens to be very expensive. So I was trying to save money, and my dad didn't charge me rent or anything. He, was happy I was home because he would have been all alone anyway. So it worked out for the both of us. The only issue was before I met my wife, when I wanted to transition, I wouldn't be able to because I couldn't tell my mom or my dad. My mom had already passed, so being alone with my dad made it even harder for me to try to come out to him. So I just suppressed my feelings. And then when I met my wife-to-be, I suppressed my inner struggle with my gender identity. And it was very hard for me. But I really had no choice. If I wanted to continue the relationship, I was very afraid to come out. And in reality, I didn't come out to anybody. It was my secret. And I tried desperately to keep it under wraps. And I did, because I never did tell anybody. And then after about a year of dating, we made plans to get married. So we got engaged, and we set a date for our wedding. And then my dad helped us out with the costs of the wedding. It was pretty expensive, and we had a wedding guest list of about 100 people. So it was a pretty nice size. and we did our wedding in Oceanside, New York, at a Knights of Columbus Hall, and it was pretty well done. We had a nice reception, the people were friendly, we took nice photographs of our wedding, so it was a wonderful experience, and I was so happy to have a bride and to see her glowing in her beautiful wedding gown. So I really felt happy, and then we had had sex actually before we married, so we had to kind of push our wedding date from November earlier to September because we were expecting in December. My wife was expecting, so we wouldn't want to have her show more, so we went to change the wedding to September, and it worked out fine. Even though she was showing, they did a good job in concealing the pregnancy. And then my wife, when she did tell me she was pregnant, she told me our child was going to be a boy. So I was very happy. I was excited, boy or girl, but it was nice. And I just wanted a child who's healthy. So I was very excited when I learned that I was going to be a father. And I was happy for my wife that she was going to be a mother. And I felt like I was on cloud 9 and very happy inside. And my internal struggles kind of dissipated. They were still there, but they were lying dormant for the time being. I battled with cross-dressing all my life, but I had stages of cross-dressing where on occasion I would stop, I would purge, but eventually I would come back to it and I would buy more clothes. So it was a never-ending cycle, purging and buying clothes. Hold on. It's not important. It's a credit card company. I don't want to deal with them. I already know I owe. But anyway, sorry for that interruption. But we were very excited when we learned that our life was going to be filled with joy and celebration because we were expecting a child into our family. I am very sentimental and very sensitive, so when I learned that my wife was pregnant and we were going to have a son, it just felt amazing, and it was truly a miracle. I always knew in my heart that I wanted to have a child. I also knew that I struggled with being transgender, so it was a balancing act, what to do, because earlier in my life I wanted to transition, but it never worked out for me. So it seemed I was destined to meet a girl and marry and have a family, a child, which I'm very happy about. In retrospect, if I transitioned earlier, I would never have a son. So I'm very lucky and very fortunate that I held off transitioning and that we have a child that we love and treasure. He's our pride and joy, and I'm very proud of him. And I always enjoy seeing him and watching him grow. It's very precious because the time of seeing your child develop is very special, but it also happens very fast, and you want to treasure every moment of that. You know, when I first held my son as a baby, he was my little one, my little buddy, and I enjoyed holding him and putting him against my chest and just feeling his heartbeat. And I enjoyed those quiet moments after a stressful day at work, having the sense of warmth and joy of holding him in my arms. I remember when my wife delivered and the nurses put him in her arms. It was a very special moment, something that I'll never forget. So I always enjoyed holding my son, but now he's a big boy, so I can't hold him and I can't even lift him. He's still weighs less than me, but he's just about near my height and probably will eclipse it very soon. So I will eventually start looking up to him, and I'm very proud of him. He has his struggles with autism, but he's a great kid, and I would do anything for my son. My transition has evolved over time. It hasn't been easy at all. In fact, I struggled with severe depression. I attempted suicide. I was very isolated, felt very alone and unsure of the future. But I knew deep down, despite the fact that I had achieved a career, that I met a woman who I fell in love with and married, and we have a son who we adore, and we bought a house, and all those things that I've accomplished, I'm very proud of. However, my transgender struggle has always been there. No matter how much I suppressed it, it was always there. At times it was dormant, but I could never get away from it, no matter how hard I tried. I had to deal with it best I could. There were instances where I cried. Obviously, as a child, I cried many nights to dressing and hiding under the covers with a pretty outfit on, crying, hoping and wishing that God would help me become a girl. And when I awoke, I realized it wasn't to be, and I was very sad. But I tried to cope as best I could, and I tried to live the way I was supposed to, and I did all the things that were expected of me as a male. But as I got older, I went through my youth, my teens, my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, and now my 50s, with this huge weight anchoring me, pulling me, and I couldn't sever the chains. They were always there, but at times there was leeway, so I could get away from what was holding me back, but it was temporary, because those chains were eventually pulled back, and they were strangling me, literally. I was desperate. I attempted suicide. I wanted help. I couldn't understand why I had these struggles. Why, if I was born a male, I identified as female. I couldn't understand it. Didn't make sense to me. But I remember as a young boy growing up, reading and researching about transgenders, not transgender. I never heard the term then, but I heard the term transsexual. And when I read about a few interesting people who became female, though they were born male, and had the full surgery, I knew then and there that I was a transsexual. And I wanted desperately to do that just like they did. I was very sensitive. I didn't know what to do about it. I couldn't tell my family, so I had to kind of hide it and live with that. And it wasn't so easy, but I coped because I buried myself in my school books, and I participated in sports, and those two things helped me. However, I still cross-dressed whenever I could. Cross-dressing was a very integral part of my life, and I had to do it so I could connect to my female gender identity. And when I cross-dressed, I was very happy, because it was my fulfillment of my feminine needs. And I identified as a female, so I wanted to dress as a female. And every time I did, I felt happy. The only problem was I did it in secret. I never went out. I tried on occasions in my early to mid-20s, but they were not satisfying enough, because they were very limited. I only went to the mall, and I walked around briefly, but I got so nervous that I never really enjoyed those experiences. And I remember that teenage girls normally could tell that I was a guy wearing women's clothes, because when I walked past teenage girls, they would look and chuckle, so I knew they were laughing at me, and that really made me scared. So I got out of the mall and changed back into my boy clothes and headed home, and I never went out again for many, many years later. So I've been transitioning since 3 years ago, but I wanted to live as a female since the age of, well, 12 was when I knew I was transsexual, but ideally I wanted to live as a female when I was 16, and I wanted to transition when I was 19, but I knew it wasn't going to happen. So when I eventually decided that I needed to transition, I knew it in my heart, because I had come to realize that I had two choices. Either I transition to become a female, or I commit suicide. And I didn't want to commit suicide because I have a son who's autistic and he needs me. So I figured I could transition and still be a father to my son, and I would regain my sense of self and happiness. So I did a lot of homework and planning and research, and I tried desperately to find support groups and a doctor that could help me. Obviously I needed to find a therapist, I needed a doctor, I wanted to be placed on hormones. There were two factors that contributed to my deciding to transition, and they both were predicated on tragedy. The first was very deep and personal. It was my dad who had committed suicide in 2009, and then I lost my close friend who consoled me and was the first to do so when he learned of my father's death. I lost him 2 years later, and he was only 40, so that was devastating too. And when I went to his wake, it was very emotionally charged, so I was very emotional and depressed, and I tried hard to console his wife and baby girl, but I broke down in tears, and she wound up hugging me and consoling me. So I felt very bad that I couldn't be strong enough to offer her help at her time of great loss. I was very devastated with the loss of my dad, and then my good friend, my close friend, that I had to go back into therapy, and I needed to find a therapist that could help me with my struggles. Obviously dealing with my dad's tragic suicide, dealing with my best friend's death prematurely, dealing with my son's autism, dealing with my work, dealing with my pressures, and then eventually dealing with my transgender struggles. We talked a lot about many different things, and then one day I told her that I was also